Hello, everybody. Sorry about that. I was helping putting away groceries that came an hour later than we thought they would. Misty, Jimmy, good to see you. Ben, glad you're here. So, got some cool stuff going on. Facebook's working, which is one thing. And the other thing is, I have a new streaming method by which, oh, thanks, Ben, by which, let's see, I'm sending out a message now, and I think it will, there it is. I mean, like the delay is down to, it's down a lot, and YouTube and Facebook are both on one chat for me, so I won't like ignore people who are on one thing or the other. Ben, did I get your message? Maybe not. I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, it's like, let's try something. Somebody give me the first 3 digits of pi. Let's see how long that takes. Maybe the delay wasn't actually the thing. Maybe it was y'all. Oh no, I did not get that message. Where did you send that message to, Ben? We can make that happen, though. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, it's better than it was. And the fact that I can see, like, Mike texted on YouTube and Ben and Misty did on Facebook, and I can see all that. OPUMC, like info at opumc.org, maybe? Misty gets that one when she's in the office. I have a pastor at opumc.org. Let's see. A text message. If it was to the Textimall thing, that's like not a real phone. It's a service. And so if you text it to that, I do eventually see it, but like once every other day or so. But no, there's nothing there. I don't know, man. Did you send a text message to the church phone number? Because it's not a cell phone. It's like a regular landline. Although we're actually going to change that this year. If you send it to the 254-773-3021 number, that is just a plain old-fashioned landline. But anyway, Ben, give me a call and we'll, whatever you need, we'll set it up, or text my cell phone and we'll sort out what you need. Hey, Jennifer. All right. We are looking at one Maccabees. All right. Y'all hang tight for just a second. Okay. Let me shoot y'all a link for what I use when I'm doing just quick online stuff. It's so cool. I send out a message and it automatically goes to Facebook and YouTube. I'm loving this. I think it's going to be a lot faster. Let's see how things are. Did anybody, well, I'm going to ask something there's going to be a yes answer to. I don't know. It doesn't matter. We'll figure it out. So here's kind of what we're going to do. I'm going to read fairly, the intention is to read fairly consistently and not stop and talk about a whole lot theologically. I will try to put some things into context for you if something comes up. But again, as I said last week, when we get to 2nd Maccabees, it's going to be the same story, but from the theological viewpoint. So that's the place where we're going to go slow. So we're going to read the first book to set the context, and then the second book we'll stop more theologically. I do want to talk about some common themes. There is a common theme in the story of the Israelites, and at least in the biblical story of the Israelites, where there's like a peaceful time, and then some kind of foreign oppression, and then a Jewish resistance rises up, and then there's a divine deliverance. And that just happens over and over again. It's the story of the book of Judges. It's the stories that we find in the books of Kings, King 1 and 2. And we're going to see it in this as well. So stick this over here. And we will start. Everybody ready? I bet the one thing I'm missing is I won't actually see like thumbs up and things like that anymore. That's too bad. So you have to actually type in chat. Okay, Alexander the Great. Yes, the Alexander the Great. Thanks, Debbie. After Alexander, son of Philip, the Macedonian, who came from the land of Kittim, had defeated King Darius. Hey, Susan Sutherland, good to see you. Had defeated King Darius of the Persians and the Medes. He succeeded him as king. He had previously become king of Greece. He fought many battles, conquered strongholds, and slaughtered the kings of the earth. He advanced to the ends of the earth and plundered many nations. When the earth became quiet before him, he was exalted, and his heart was lifted up. He gathered a very strong army and ruled over countries, nations, and princes, and they paid him tribute. After this, he fell sick and perceived that he was dying. So he summoned his most honored officers, who had been brought up with him from youth, and divided his kingdom among them while he was still alive. And after Alexander had reigned for 12 years, he died. Then his officers began to rule, each in his own place. They all put on crowns after his death, and so did their descendants after them for many years, and they caused many evils on the earth. So this is like world history stuff at this point. That is, like I said, the Alexander the Great, and when he died, his kingdom was so big that one person could not rule it. It took 4. And that's what happened. From them came forth a sinful root. Antioch Epiphanes, son of King Antiochus, he had been a hostage in Rome. He began to reign in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. In those days, certain renegades came out from Israel and misled many, saying, "Let's go make a covenant with the nations around us, for since we separated from them, many disasters had come upon us." This proposal pleased them, and some of the people eagerly went to the king, who authorized them to observe the ordinances of the nations. So they built a gymnasium in Jerusalem according to the custom of the nations, and made foreskins for themselves, and abandoned the holy covenant. They joined with the nations and sold themselves to do evil. So just historically, this is a time when Israel was doing fine on their own. But some people started talking about how horrible things were and all the disasters that had happened, natural disasters too. But remember, in those days, especially for the people of our God in those days, any kind of disaster would have been punishment from God for doing evil. And so they evidently thought that what they were doing was wrong, and so they wanted to do something different, and so they did something different. And they became like the Gentiles, basically. They built the gymnasium in Jerusalem according to the customs of the nations. They made foreskins for themselves so that they weren't circumcised anymore, and abandoned the Holy Covenant. And no, I don't know how they did that. I'm going to assume that's a little metaphorical. When Antiochus saw that his kingdom was established, he determined to become the land of Egypt, in order that he might reign over both kingdoms. So he invaded Egypt with a strong force, with chariots and elephants and cavalry, and with a large fleet. He engaged King Ptolemy of Egypt in battle, and Ptolemy turned and fled before him, and many were wounded and fell. They captured the fortified cities in the land of Egypt, and he plundered the land of Egypt. After subduing Egypt, Antiochus turned back in the 143rd year and went up against Israel and came to Jerusalem with a strong force. He arrogantly entered the sanctuary and took the golden altar and the lampstand and the light and all of its utensils. He also took the table for the bread of the presence, the cups for drink offerings, the bowls, the golden censers, the curtain, the crowns, the gold decorations on the front of the temple. He stripped all of it off. He took the silver and the gold and the costly vessels. He took the hidden treasures that he found. Taking them all, he went into his own land. So this is I forget the actual name of it, but it was the defiling of the sanctuary. Basically, it's the word I'm looking for. Impetus for everything, the rebellion that came after that. As part of this, he outlawed circumcision. He outlawed worshiping on the Sabbath. He outlawed the Jewish laws. In a way, if you go back, and remember, I mentioned that these are like the book of Judges and Kings. One of the books that is very similar to that, although it has its own book, is the book of Esther. And that's kind of what happened in the book of Esther, although in that story, it wasn't the king so much that did it as somebody who had the king's ear and caused that. And in a similar way, you can also think about Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, who refused to not worship God the way that they worshiped God, and they were put into the furnace and delivered from the furnace. So you see, it's that cycle. It's that cycle of Israel kind of being okay and then wanting something different, and as a result of that, being occupied by a foreign force, and then rebelling against that force and winning their independence, and then having a time of peace again. It's just that cycle over and over. Okay. And then we had this little poem. He shed much blood and spoke with great arrogance. Israel mourned deeply in every community. Rulers and elders groaned. Young women and young men became faint. The beauty of the women faded. Every bridegroom took up the lament. She who sat in the bridal chamber was mourning. Even the land trembled for its inhabitants. And all of the house of Jacob was clothed with shame. Let me check something. I'm curious about this. So one of the keys here. Interesting, Ben. One of the keys here is the word lament. Every bridegroom took up the lament. If you read through the Psalms, you'll find certain Psalms that are called laments. And this is written very much like one of the laments in the Psalms, and that's why in your Bible, if you're looking at one or if you're looking online, you'll see that this section is separated out, and that's why. So this is probably something that was repeated quite often as they told the story of the Maccabean Revolution. That was probably a part of it that was told word for word exactly the same. So that was like an important part that became a song or a poem. We're going to see that same format here in just a minute. So let's continue. 2 years later, the king sent to the cities of Judah a chief collector of tribute, and he came to Jerusalem with a large force. Deceitfully, he spoke peaceable words to them, and they believed him, but suddenly fell upon the city, dealt it a severe blow, and destroyed many of the people of Israel. He plundered the city, burned it with fire, and tore down its houses and surrounding walls. They took captive the women and children and seized the livestock. Then they fortified the city of David with a large, strong wall and strong towers, and it became their citadel. There is something in my mind. Oh, hang on a second. I'm doing some quick on-the-fly research. Yeah, I guess, again, going back to Kings, 2 Kings talked about Nebuchadnezzar besieging Jerusalem, breaking through its walls, and the army fleeing. And then Lamentations, which is a whole book of the Bible, has a poem that says, "The Lord has given up his altar, abandoned his sanctuary, he has delivered into the hand of his enemy the walls of her palaces." So again, I'm trying not to stop a lot, and not for theological reasons, but I do want you to see this cycle. And that's one reason that we're looking at this today. I mean, when else in Israel's history has a foreign occupation come in, dealt a destructive blow, and taken hostages? Anybody think of a time that happened? Like maybe October 7th last year or the year before? Hard to believe it's been that long now. Okay. I know there's other places in the Bible I'm thinking of too. It's just such a horrible, destructive cycle. They stationed there a sinful nation who were renegades. They strengthened their position. They stored up arms and food and collecting the spoils of Jerusalem. They stored them there and became a great menace. And now we have a lament again. For the citadel became an ambush against the sanctuary, an evil adversary of Israel at all times. On every side of the sanctuary, they shed innocent blood. They even defiled the sanctuary. Because of them, the residents of Jerusalem fled. She became a dwelling of strangers. She became strange to her offspring, and her children forsook her. Her sanctuary became desolate like a desert. Her feasts were turning into mourning, her Sabbaths into a reproach, her honor into contempt. Her dishonor now grew as great as her glory. Her exaltation was turned into mourning. And of course, I guess I'm thinking of Jesus standing up the Mount of Olives, looking out over Israel. Let me get that exact quote for you. Jesus weeps over Jerusalem. And when he drew near the city, he wept over it, saying, would that you, even you, had known this day the things that make for peace. But for now they're hidden from your eyes. For the days will come upon you when your enemies will set up a barricade around you and surround you and hem you in on every side and tear you down to the ground, you and your children within you. And they will not leave one stone upon another in you, because you did not know the time of your visitation. It's just that cycle. All right, continuing on. Verse 41, the installation of Gentile cults. Then the king wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people, and that all should give up their particular customs. All the nations accepted the command of the king. Many even from Israel gladly adopted his religion. They sacrificed to idols and profaned the Sabbath. And the king sent letters by messengers to Jerusalem and the town of Judah. He directed them to follow customs strange to the land, to forbid burnt offerings and sacrifices and drink offerings in the sanctuary, to profane Sabbaths and festivals, to defile the sanctuary and the holy ones, to build altars and sacred precincts and shrines for idols, to sacrifice pigs and other unclean animals, and to leave their sons uncircumcised. They were to make themselves abominable by everything unclean and profane. Now, this is, I don't know that we'll ever get to this because it's kind of boring, but the book of Leviticus is all about the Levitical laws, and the important part of it theologically is that you have things that are clean, and when things are clean, they are both not profane and not dirty. So when things got defiled, they fell into two categories. One is unclean and the other is profane. So one is just a matter of, and maybe this is where cleanliness is next to godliness. The idea came from. It's not. Anyway. So for instance, in the Bible, in Leviticus and the Levitical laws, there will be sections of the Bible that talk about eating pork, eating shellfish, having animals with hooves and doing certain things. And some of those will be in the section of profanity, things that make things defiled. I really wish I could use a different word. It's just escaping me right now. And some things just made things dirty. And dirty things could make you sick. Now, there wasn't a whole lot of difference, because sick things, that were dirty and thus made you sick, they took that to mean that you had done something wrong. Remember, if you got sick, it's because you did something wrong. It's that Deuteronomistic theology. If you do good things happen to you. If you do bad things happen to you. So if you get sick, it's because you did a bad thing. And so, or you did an unclean thing, and there's very little separation between the ramifications of those two things. But they are there, and it is important, because as Christianity separated from Judaism, a lot of the things that were unclean were no longer unclean anymore. And you can talk about the theological reasons for that. Things like Jesus coming to Peter in a dream and saying it's okay to eat certain animals that you couldn't eat before. Yeah, I mean, pork was so bad, evidently, that they thought it was dirty enough that it must be evil. I mean, that's where that came from. People died, and we know that raw pork is a lot worse for you than raw beef, right? So that I'm sure that's the origin of why pork and pigs not pork and pigs, but pigs were so profane and unclean. Okay, let's move on. And then he added, whoever does not obey the command of the king shall die. In such words, he wrote to his whole kingdom. He appointed inspectors over all the people and commanded the towns of Judah to offer sacrifice town by town. Many of the people, even everyone who forsook the law, joined them, and they did evil in the land. They drove Israel into hiding in every place of refuge they had. Now on the 15th day of Chislev, in the 145th year, hang on, let me mute this tab. I apologize. Okay. Stop it. You know who you are. Okay, on the 15th day of Chislev, in the 145th year, they erected a desolating sacrilege on the altar of burnt offering. They also built altars in the surrounding towns of Judah and offered incense at the doors of the houses and in streets. The books of the law that they found they tore to pieces and burned with fire. Anyone found possessing the book of the covenant, or anyone who adhered to the law, was condemned to death by decree of the king. Now that's rough, because there were a lot of laws. I mean, how do you... it's like opposite day, right? Like how... over 600 Levitical laws. How did you... what does that even mean if you adhered to the law? What about thou shalt not kill? That was a law. Obviously, not everything was included, but this is the story, and we're going to read the story. They kept using violence against Israel, against those who were found month after month in the towns. On the 25th day of the month, they offered sacrifice on the altar that was on top of the altar of burnt offering. According to the decree, they put to death the women who had their children circumcised, and their families and those who circumcised them, and they hung the infants from their mothers' necks. But many in Israel stood firm, and were resolved in their hearts not to eat unclean food. They chose to die, rather than to be defiled by food, or to profane the holy covenant, and they did die. Very great wrath came upon Israel. When Peter dreamed that he can eat anything, that is, preached to the Gentiles too, not only the Jews. When Peter dreamed that he can eat anything, that's preached to the Gentiles. Yeah, and that's a lot of why Peter and Paul argued. In that vision, which we find in the book of Acts, God declared to Peter that all food was clean. You could eat anything. Thank goodness, because I really like bacon. But the more important part of that, and I think maybe this is what you're saying, Ben, the more important part of that was that the Gentiles were also no longer unclean. Not just eating meat was okay, but Gentiles themselves were not only not unclean, they were fine by themselves. They did not need to be circumcised. They did not need to follow certain rites, rituals, and certain laws of the Israelites. But those who were Israelites still should have. And that's, kind of what we have today. So, yeah. Okay, let's go on to book 2. Not book 2, chapter 2. Matthias and his sons. In those days, Matthias, the son of John of Simeon, a priest of the clan... Oh, let me just take a quick look at my notes. Make sure there's nothing that I really wanted to talk about. I think we got... I mean, I guess as we move forward, you need to keep in mind the defiling of the altar, because in chapter 4, we're going to see the restoration of the altar. And the restoration of the altar will be celebrated by the holiday known as Hanukkah. So we're talking about the defiling of the temple here, but that will show up later. And the other cycle that's going to be played out even more directly than just the general cycle of foreign occupation and rebellion and divine deliverance is this sort of the idea of the Hellenization, the Greekifying, if you will, versus Jewish identity, keeping those things separate, foreshadows the later Jewish conflicts that they'll have with, for instance, Rome. That was a big one. That's why the Jewish people were and are still looking for a Messiah. They, as a people, they did not find that in Jesus, like the Christians and those of us who have followed in that path, in that way, do. They wanted Jesus to come and save them from the Roman occupation, and that's why. And I know you all know this, but that's why when he enters into Jerusalem on what we celebrate as Palm Sunday, they're full of hosannas and they're putting down their cloaks and letting him walk in because they thought he was going to come in and overthrow the Romans right then and there. And so when he ended that week by dying on a cross, many of them had lost faith in him, and that's echoed here, really. And I guess it's important to keep in mind also that they were always looking for a Messiah, right? They're still looking for a Messiah. So, in those days, Matthias, son of John, son of Simeon, a priest of the clan of Yorib, moved from Jerusalem and settled in Modine. He had 5 sons: John, surnamed Gadi, Simon, called Tassi, Judas, called Maccabeus, Eleazar, called Avaran, and Jonathan, called Aphus. So obviously the person that we're going to focus on is going to be Judas, who is called Maccabeus. Maccabeus. Okay. He saw the blasphemies being committed in Judah and Jerusalem and said, and now we have another lament. And you can just tell as they told this story through the years, this was one that got word for word or even sung, who knows. Alas, why was I born to see this? The ruin of my people, the ruin of the holy city. The people sat idle there when it was given over to the enemy, the sanctuary given over to strangers. Her temple has become like a person without honor. Her glorious vessels have been carried into exile. Her infants have been killed in her streets, her youths by the sword of the foe. What nation has not inherited her palaces and has not seized her spoils? All her adornment has been taken away. No longer free, she has become a slave. And see, our holy place, our beauty, and our glory has been laid waste. The nations had profaned them. Why should we live any longer? Then Matthias and his sons tore their clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned greatly. And of course, that's a tradition that we see many times throughout the story of the Israelites. Verse 15, the king's officers who were enforcing the apostasy came to town of Modine to make them offer sacrifice. Many from Israel came to them, and Matthias and his sons were assembled. Then the king's officers spoke to Matthias as follows: You are a leader, honored and great in this town and supported by sons and brothers. Now be the first to come and do what the king commands, as all the nations and the people of Judah and those who are left in Jerusalem had done. Then you and your sons will be numbered among the friends of the king, and you and your sons will be honored with silver and gold and many gifts. But Matthias answered and said in a loud voice, Even if all the nations that live under the rule of the king obey him and have chosen to obey his commandments, every one of them abandoning the religion of their ancestors, I and my sons and my brothers will continue to live by the covenant of our ancestors. Far be it from us to desert the law and the ordinances. We will not obey the king's word by turning aside from our religion to the right hand or to the left. When he had finished speaking these words, a Jew came forward in the sight of all to offer sacrifice on the altar in Modine, according to the king's command. When Matthias saw it, he burned with zeal, and his heart was stirred. He gave vent to righteous anger. He ran and slaughtered him on the altar. At the same time, he killed the king's officer who was forcing them to sacrifice, and he tore down the altar. Thus he burned with zeal for the law, just as Phinehas did against Zimri, son of Salu. It reminds me of the scene from 300 where the messenger comes and he's before that pit, and he feels like he's completely safe because there's no way that they would ever defy him. And he just does the kick where he kicks him into the pit. That's the vibe I get from this. Then Matthias cried out in the town with a loud voice, saying, "Let everyone who is zealous for the law and supports the covenant come out with me." Then he and his sons fled to the hills and left all that they had in the town. At that time, many who were seeking righteousness and justice went down to the wilderness to live there. They, their sons, their wives, and their livestock, because troubles pressed heavily upon them. And it was reported to the king's officers and to the troops in Jerusalem, the city of David, that those who had rejected the king's command had gone down to the hiding places in the wilderness. Hiding places in the wilderness. Many pursued them and overtook them. They encamped opposite them and prepared for battle against them on the Sabbath day. They said to them, "Enough of this. Come out and do what the king commands, and you will live." They said, "We will not come out, nor will we do what the king commands, and so profane the Sabbath day." Then the enemy quickly attacked them. But they did not answer them or hurl a stone at them or block up their hiding places, for they said, "Let us all die in our innocence. Heaven and earth testify for us that you are killing us unjustly." So they attacked them on the Sabbath, and they died, with their wives and their children and livestock, to the number of 1,000 persons. I don't know exactly what you're talking about, Ben. I was just thinking of Corrie ten Boom, A Hiding Place. Just something that came to my mind. Talking about when David hid from Saul in 1 Samuel. It's been a long time since I read that story, my friend. I think you've got me beat on that one. Okay. When Matthias and his friends learned of it, they mourned for them deeply, and all said to their neighbors, "If we all do as our kindred have done, and refuse to fight with the nations for our lives and for our ordinances, they will quickly destroy us from the earth." So they made the decision that day, "Let us fight against anyone who comes to attack us on the Sabbath day. Let us not all die as our kindred died in their hiding places." So they decided that they would, for their survival, that they would not honor one of their laws, one of the most important laws for them in that particular time, before Jesus came and explained that the Sabbath was made for humankind. The humankind was not made for the Sabbath, sort of turning the whole thing on their head. But it was a necessary and very, they obviously attacked them on the Sabbath, knowing that that's what would happen. So excuse me. Okay. Now we're going to get into a counterattack. Then there united with them a company of Hazadeans, mighty warriors of Israel, who offered themselves willingly for the law. And all who became fugitives to escape their troubles joined them and reinforced them. They organized an army and struck down sinners in their anger and renegades in their wrath. The survivors fled to the nations for safety. And Matthias and his friends went around and tore down the altars. They forcibly circumcised all the uncircumcised boys with whom they found within the borders of Israel. They hunted down the arrogant, and the work prospered in their hands. They rescued the law out of the hands of the nations and kings, and they never let the sinner gain the upper hand. Now the days drew near for Matthias to die, and he said to his sons, "Arrogance and scorn have now become strong. It's a time of ruin and furious anger. Now, my children, show zeal for the law and give your lives for the covenant of our ancestors." And that's a repetition back of verse 27. Then Matthias cried out in the town with a loud voice, saying, "Let everyone who is zealous for the law and supporters covenant come out with me." So again, my children, show zeal for the law and give your lives for the covenant of our ancestors. Remember the deeds of the ancestors, which they did in their generations, and you will receive great honor and everlasting name. And, keep in mind, they were successful, right? They went out to fight the oppressors, and they were successful, even though they began that revolt on the Sabbath. And therefore, they would have believed that what they did was okay. And I certainly don't disagree with that. I disagree with their theological conclusion that because it was successful, they had not sinned. We don't base our sinfulness on our success. We know today that there is a lot of sin and success. That's one reason why the prosperity gospel is so vile to me, because it focuses on this ancient, wrong, Deuteronomistic theology that good things will happen to good people. And so if you do good things, if you give a lot of money to your church, you will be blessed, and every good thing's going to happen to you, and you'll live great lives. And that's the prosperity gospel, and it has no answer for things like hurricanes and fires and school shooters and the evils of humankind and the quote unquote evils of nature. Anyway, remember the deeds of their ancestors, which they did in their generations, receive great honor and everlasting name. Was not Abraham found faithful when tested, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness? Joseph, in the time of his distress, kept the commandment and became Lord of Egypt. Phinehas, our ancestor, because he was deeply zealous, received the covenant of everlasting priesthood. Joshua, because he fulfilled the command, became a judge in Israel. Caleb, because he testified in the assembly, received an inheritance in the land. David, because he was merciful, inherited the throne of the kingdom forever. 2 Samuel 7:13. Except, and this is one place we're going to find something really different. So Matthias is saying that David inherited the throne of the kingdom forever. That's an interesting interpretation, because David was long dead at this point. And I think most modern day followers of Judaism and in the same vein, Christians would believe that in the line of David would come someone, which is exactly what 2 Samuel 7:13 says, that one of your ancestors will rise up and become, you'll sit on the throne in the house of David forever. So I don't know, according Matthias, nobody at this point, this is 147 years before Christ, 143 years before Christ was born. So I don't think at this point they would have thought that David actually fulfilled that. Yes, of course, Ben. That's how we interpret that as Christians. Followers of Judaism today are still waiting for someone from the house of David to sit on the throne forever. So it's just an interesting line. Okay, well, said I wasn't going to get deep into theology today, but let me check something. Okay. But it doesn't say David will sit. Oh, okay. I understand now. David, because he was merciful, inherited the throne of the kingdom forever. He inherited the throne of the kingdom forever. So they were still waiting for someone to claim that ultimate inheritance. Sorry. Sometimes this stuff has to be read pretty closely, huh? Elijah, because of great zeal for the law, was taken up into heaven. Hannah, Azariah, and Mishael believed and were saved from the flame. That's Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. Shadrach, and Abednego. I believe those are their new names, and their original names were Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. Believed and were saved from flame. Daniel, because of his innocence, was delivered from the mouth of the lions. I would assume, Debbie, I don't want to say for sure, but I would absolutely think that would be the case. I don't know how closely they track it. I don't know. I wonder if there is like a sect in charge of following that lineage, if they followed the family line. I mean, it would be so diverse at this point. That's such a good question. Hang on a second. We are going to stop and take a look at that. Give me just a second. And yes, I am using artificial intelligence as a search engine here because it's far superior than Google. Very interesting. Okay. So yes, absolutely, they believe that the Messiah will come from the line of David. That is a belief that they still hold. However, and the problem with DNA testing, Debbie, is that they don't have records anymore. When the Second Temple was destroyed in 70 AD, the event that Jesus spoke of that I mentioned from the Mount of Olives, the utter destruction of the temple, all of the records were destroyed. And so they would not be able to trace anyone living to the line of David. So that knowledge is lost. DNA testing can tell who's related to who, but they don't have DNA from David. It brings up a lot of really interesting science crossovers between science fiction and religion, like the shroud. I forget what it's called specifically, but the shroud that Jesus supposedly, I think, took off after he was laid in the tomb. Someone claimed they found it like 30 years ago or so, and that they were able to get DNA from it. And And then, of course, the conspiracy theory is that the Vatican holds all that stuff. I'm not saying any of that's true. I said specifically that's science fiction mixed in with religion as far as I am aware of. But yeah, that would be the problem. Yeah, that one, Ben. So that's a great question, Debbie. They are still looking for Messiah from the Davidic line, but they cannot track it genealogically. At least the ones who are still looking for a Messiah. And again, this is not my religion, and I don't know it well at all. But there are many Jews today. I'm trying to think of what their sect is called, or if that's even the right word. I think it's like secular Judaism, or maybe it's the Reformed Judaism. They don't actually believe that a Messiah is coming or was ever going to come, but that instead the Messianic era was an era of peace. And I don't know if they think that happened and is gone now, or if they're still waiting for that to happen. Obviously, they have not been in an era of peace in any line of history that we're able to track. So maybe they're still looking for that. Yeah, I don't even know if that's, I don't know, Debbie. I don't know if there are many, by a definition of the word, that are converting to Christianity. There are certainly Messianic Jews, and that portion of the cultural lineage of Judaism, or of the Jewish heritage, is growing. I don't know how fast, but yep. Okay, let's continue. We'll just get through the rest of this chapter, and we did good tonight. So he's going through and talking. Daniel, because of his innocence, was delivered from the mouth of the lion. So that's a great speech. I'm going to put this in here actually as, where's my mouse? Hang on. Okay, over there. So let's look at 1 Mac 51. 1 Mac 1, no, 2, 51 through 60. This is just a great little passage that I think is worth. Right, Ben, that's Jurassic Park. Okay, let's see if that goes through. It was a long, I don't know if I have a limit on how long I can make messages. Yeah, it didn't seem to go through. Okay, well, then I'll just do this. There's a link just to that specific passage. And so observe from generation to generation that none of those who put their trust in him will lack strength. Do not fear the words of sinners, for their splendor will turn into dung and worms. Today they will be exalted, but tomorrow they will not be found, for they will have returned to the dust and their plans will have perished. My children, be courageous and grow strong in the law, for by it you will gain honor. Here is your brother Simeon, who I know is wise in counsel. Always listen to him. He shall be your father. Judas Maccabeus has been a mighty warrior from his youth. He shall command the army for you and fight the battle against the peoples. He shall rally around you all who observe the law and avenge the wrong done to your people. Pay back the nations in full and obey the commands of the law. Then he blessed them and was gathered to his ancestors. He died in the 146th year and was buried in the tomb of his ancestors at Modine. And all Israel mourned for him with great lamentation. And that is where we will end it tonight. Next week, we'll be looking at chapter 3 of Maccabees. Let me look real fast because I am going to miss a Wednesday. I think it is not until February, though. Is that right? Is it February? The Tuesday night that I can't make? Okay, hang on. Yeah, February 4th. So we've got plenty of time before then. That good with everybody? Interesting story, huh? Well, I'm interested to see. I might go back and watch some of the live stream on YouTube and Facebook to see how the delay is. I think this way of streaming is going to be far superior, though. I like how, even though nobody made any comments on YouTube, if they did, I'd be able to see it. So, very good. All right, everybody. Well, thank you. See you hopefully on Sunday. If you're local, if you're in Indiana, try to stay warm. In fact, if you're in Texas, try to stay warm. Wherever you are, stay warm. What do I say?